This is the Strike Mash Boil podcast, presented by the Merrimack Valley Home Brew Club.
This week we talk beer engines and cask ale, and Brett Bauer joins us to talk about his journey as a professional brewer. That and more, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to Strike Mash Boil. I'm Marco, president of Merrimack Valley Homebrew Club, and I'm joined by my co-host, Phil.
We've got a great show this week. Brett Bauer is joining us to talk about his career as a professional brewer and his plans for his new homebrewing setup.
But first, we're realizing we haven't actually done one of our quick fire rounds on us. So we're gonna do one of us today. And Phil, you're on the spot today, where we're going to ask you our quick fire questions, just so folks can maybe get to know us a little bit. Does that sound good?
Sure. Why not?
All right. So quick fire. You're gonna remember, we're just gonna throw them at you. First thing that comes to your head. You haven't prepped for this, right?
No.
All right. Perfect. All right. Your favorite beer style?
German lager.
Least favorite beer style?
Smoked beers.
Your favorite beer ingredient?
Oh boy.
Tick.
Pilsner
tick,
malt.
Tick. Your least favorite beer ingredient?
Smoked malt.
I'm shocked there.
Yeah.
Which piece of brewing equipment could you never live without?
Control panel for my electric brewery.
That makes sense. Which piece of brewing equipment do you think is most overrated?
Ooh. This is tough because I probably own a bunch of overrated items.
A recent one, I think, actually.
Would that be the beer engine, the can seamer, the condenser lid?
Just flip a coin. I guess
you
there's
know what?
more than two sides.
I'll pass.
Oh, God, that's a very strategic move there.
Yeah.
What is your dream piece of brewing equipment if money was not a factor?
One of those fully loaded E010 conicals.
Those things are badass. Which beer topic, subject, style do you wish would just go away?
Pastry stouts.
Desert Island beer.
Augustiner Edelstoff.
Very specific. When you aren't in the mood for a beer, what's your cocktail?
It's seasonal. So summertime, I like tiki cocktails. And in the wintertime, probably like old fashions.
So those are the quick fire questions. That's pretty good. What the hell's a tiki cocktail?
Just a...
Like pineapple juice and coconut rum?
No, like a real Mai Tai or something like
I see.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Do you make those on your own?
Yeah.
Pretty interesting. I've seen you post stuff before. I've never associated a tiki cocktail with it, but now I know what to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, there's like this whole subculture of the cocktail world that's all tiki drinks, and they're not the ones you get at your bad Chinese restaurants. A real good tiki cocktail is a finely crafted beverage.
Wait, listen, I take offense to that because a shitty Chinese restaurant it's part of that crappy tiki cocktail, as you call it, is that wonderful experience of greasy, horrible Chinese food. It turns into a glorious drink.
I don't disagree with you, but that's not a real tiki cocktail.
God, just when you thought people could only be pretentious about beer, right?
Yeah.
This actually brings up there's some other things I want to ask you about, because I think people would be curious to hear about it. And I know we've got some episodes planned where we're going to actually try some of these things, but something that you're a huge fan of, and you didn't actually mention it when we went through your list here, but you're a big fan of Real Ale, which for those that don't know, Real Ale is also known as cask beer. And you and I have been talking a lot about this. We've got a few guys in the club that love cask beer. So we've got a little project going on where we're planning on setting up a cask ale system at home for ourselves. So you want to just mention what a cask ale is and why we have this brilliant idea.
A cask ale, Real Ale, is a traditional English way of serving beer. It's a somewhat low carbonated compared to what we drink here in the States. So 1.25 to 1.5 volumes of CO2. Traditionally, it's served somewhere around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Casks are naturally carbonated, and traditionally they are left open to air once you vent and tap them. So you really only have about 2 to 3 days before the beer goes stale and bad. You can kind of get around that a little bit with putting a breather on it and just letting some CO2 breathe back on, but you're not putting it under pressure. So your breather needs to be, you're really breathing CO2 at like 1 psi.
Folks that aren't used to cask beer, because it's not very common here in the US, although there are lots of places that try to focus on it. It's usually delivered by what's called a beer engine.
Right.
Which people have seen, at least on TV. At the very least, you've seen one on TV at some point or in a movie. And it's that funky looking brass thing with a handle that you're pulling the handle, and it's basically pumping beer into a glass.
That's right. Yeah.
And so a few guys have picked some of these up. Like, we're bringing a little bit of the UK over to the US. So you've got one of these now.
Yeah.
Where did you actually get it from?
Yeah. So first, a beer engine is, like you said, it's a hand pump. There's no forced carbonation, no forced CO2, pressurized CO2 on the cask. Historically, pre-pressurized systems, the casks would live in a cellar underneath the bar, and there had to be a way of getting the beer out of the cask up to the bar at the pub. And so these beer engines, you were literally pumping the beer from the cask down in the cellar up into the glass. So that is still a way they serve beer in the UK today. Anagrams and whatnot are somewhat expensive. They can run over $500 for one. Reconditioned, maybe like $380, $400. But there's a new manufacturer. Well, actually not new. Masons is the name of the manufacturer. They're an old company. They're making them for hundreds of years. But they're now making a homebrew, or not a homebrew, but a home pub version beer engine. So they've kind of gotten rid of a lot of the really high end, and a pub is going to go through hundreds of pints in a night. So they got rid of a lot of that horsepower, if you will.
You say that though, but there's been a lot of pubs that have bought in these.
That's right. Yes. They're so inexpensive in the UK that a lot of pubs are buying them for their own pubs. So we picked up a couple of them, had them shipped over from the UK, with shipping, not cheap, but it was actually cheaper to buy them in a group. I think we bought 3 and brought them over. And what's really killer about this setup is it comes with pretty much everything you need to connect to whatever you're trying to connect to. So it comes with all they call it piping, but it comes with the hoses, the tubing that's insulated, which is pretty slick. Really easy to connect to a corny keg. Just put on a ball lock on the end. Comes with connections so you can do a bag and box, and then also for a poly pin, or also for a cask.
The plan for you to use actual casks, again, folks might not know what these things are. A real cask is, you see, it looks like, it's not stainless steel. What are they made out of?
Stainless steel.
Is it stainless? It's just not polished, I guess.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So it's a stainless steel.
Looks like
a barrel. Yeah, like a small barrel tipped on its side with a tap on the front and a bung hole on the top.
Correct.
And so, are you pulling beer from one of those guys? Like, because that's a type of thing that once it's open, right? You gotta smash that beer.
I mean, you can put, and they now make cask breathers. I mentioned that before, so you can have a way of breathing CO2 onto the cask, and they do last about a month or so that way. Casks are really expensive. The small ones are called pins, 5 gallons. The about 10-gallon size is called a firkin. They are really pricey compared to like a corny keg. So I know a bunch of people who have them. I have made beer for casks, but for my home setup right now, I am, I spent all the money on the beer engine. I've already got corny kegs. Purists are going to kill me for saying
what's the difference though? Seriously, like, all right, the purists, like, okay, yeah, I mean, sit on your high horse and yell at the people sitting over. What the hell's the difference?
So really the difference is it's laying on its side. It's horizontal. So big thing about British beer is dropping bright. So you want that beer to drop super clear. The shorter the distance from the top of the beer to the bottom of the beer, right, like a lager tank, the quicker the beer drops bright. A cask sits on its side for pretty much the exact same reason. Otherwise, now I can find a beer with gelatin just the same, package it off the conical.
You're telling me people are spending crazy amounts of money just so beer can be on its side?
Yeah, probably.
All right, so here I'm trying to think.
Purists, so I'm sure there are some other reasons for that.
No, now I got to think about what our next get rich scheme is. Is there a way? So I'm trying to think. All right, so on a traditional ball lock corny keg, we could store one of those bad boys on its side, right? That's not hard. What can we do to the lid of it? Can we have something that we can pull beer out of the lid versus out of the dip tube?
I mean, you could always pour beer out of your gas post instead, and
That's probably too high. Oh no, I guess you could actually. I'm thinking about this. You could just swap put your liquid out on the top and your gas in on the bottom. So you could do that.
So there are some people who do this. First, you need a keg that seals really tight, because we all know sometimes if you haven't pressurized your corny keg and give it a slosh around unless that lid is really, really tight, it will leak. But you could run gas through the liquid outpost, because if it's laying on its side, then the gas is going to be all, and you kind of want to elevate it a little bit at the back. So that would put the gas up, through that dip tube all the way up at the back at the top. And then you would just pour beer out of basically the old gas in. And you could put a floaty, one of those torpedo floaty ball things in there too, and that could help. I mean, think about a keg.
Okay, all right. So
25 inches long. Right now you're going to lay it on its side. That's pretty big.
Well, it sounds like it'll work great to drop bright. No, I mean, is that not
sure? But if you've already find it in your if you've already thrown the gelatin in your conical, then what does it matter?
Well, I suppose that I've grown accustomed to just pissing people off on this, so I'm going to say, fuck the purist cask guys.
Oh boy, I know too many of those guys.
They're
probably listening to this.
Yeah, well, the hell with you needing an actual cask. We figured it out. You'll get, I guarantee you, what you're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. We're going to tell everybody you have a cask. You're not really going to get one. We're going to take one of your corny kegs and pour it aside. We'll have your purists come to your house and have a few pints pulled off of that, and they'll never know the difference, and they'll expose how pure they are.
So what I'm actually what I'm really looking forward to, and some of these guys are Nirax guys, so they're New England Real Ale Exhibition. It's a big beer fest for only
Nirax is amazing. Just for those guys that are listening, the purists, go back to them. I love Nirax. You guys are awesome.
So I am really excited to try. There's this method of doing cask ale in the UK called beer in a bag, and I've been chatting with some of these guys on a text chat about trying this out, and they're pretty interested to see how this works. Hopefully,
so am I. You've mentioned this before, so like going back to the dropping bright thing, you probably don't want to do that in a bag.
You don't. So you would want to find your beer in whatever fermenter you're using. Whether, like for me, I do have a conical, but whether it's a bucket or a spidle or whatever it is, you would want to fine it with gelatin there before you move it to the bag.
And people might be having a hard time imagining this.
Yeah.
But this is basically, I'm trying to think of what the equivalent would be. Well, I guess not too many people would know like how soda is delivered in a draft system. They probably don't realize that.
It's more like wine in a box.
But I was saying, because that's essentially what soda is when you have it hooked up in an actual restaurant commercial system. It's just a bag of syrup that pulls into the carbonated water. But yeah, if you think about a boxed wine, that bag that sits inside the boxed wine with a little tap at the bottom, that's what we're talking about here. But larger.
Your boxed wines are 3 liters, maybe 5 liters. I'm talking 10 to 20 liters. So 10 liters is about 2.5 gallons, and 20 liters is almost a full 5.
And you've got these things that's like flopping around your house somewhere.
So I have taken my ESB, or not ESB, it's a best bidder, and I've done 2 of the bags. I primed it in the bag, which right there is scary as shit to think that you've basically potentially got a bomb right there, because the bag is not as...
Well, these things must be rated for some sort of carbonation, no?
No, none at all. So, yeah, here's the beer in a bag thing. So over in the UK, they're doing beer in bags in boxes as a to-go thing, because all these cask breweries don't have a way of packaging beer, because all they do is beer by cask, and they send it to the pub. And because the pub culture over in the UK is completely different than over here, it's very much like the beer garden culture in Central Europe. They don't, very few breweries there package in bottles, very few packaging cans, or if they do, they're not doing it to the extent of, say, probably relatively easy for somebody like a Night Shift to pivot from a lot of kegs and cans to mostly cans, right? But for these breweries over there, they don't have mobile canners that are running around the country, and if they do, there's a lot of breweries over there to get to. So they are still casking their beer and still conditioning it and then venting it, and then they pour it into, or they rack it into these bags. So it's already at the 1.25, 1.5 volumes when they put it in the bag, and it's already dropped bright, right? They're basically using the casks as a bright tank. So they're able to follow their whole process all the same. Then they fill the bags, throw them in a box, put it up for 35 quid or 40 quid online and sell it. And they're even delivering it for free.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that, free beer delivery. It just sounds wonderful. Well, I got to tell you, I'm pretty excited for this little venture to kick off, and I'm really excited too, because in addition to this, I think you've gotten the green light recently to do a little pub in your shed outdoor space.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty stoked to see beer in a box, the beer engine, cask beer flowing, and us hanging out in there again. It's going to be a pretty cool venture to be a part of.
Yeah, someday when all this goes away, we'll if I name it the Winchester, we'll just go in there, hang out until this all blows over.
Yeah, so we'll have to check back in, and I don't know, sometime in the future to see how that's going.
Absolutely. Time for this week's beer review. Each week, we're going to review a beer submitted to us by a member of the Merrimack Valley Homebrew Club or from one of our listeners. Our guest judge is going to walk through the judging process as if this were a homebrew competition. All they know is the category of the beer, which this week is 30A Spice Herb Vegetable Beer. Now, for this beer style, you're supposed to provide some additional information. So the base style is a Gruit off of a dark English mild. It's a 7% ABV beer, and it was brewed with wormwood, sweet gale, juniper tips, rosemary, cinnamon, and star anise.
Yeah, so back with us is our certified national BJCP judge, aka the Doc. Nick, welcome back.
Hey, good to be here.
Really looking forward to seeing the Green Fairy with this one. So you got your score sheet. You want to take us through it?
Absolutely. This is a really, really interesting beer. When I first saw the ingredients, it obviously screams Gruit. What's really interesting about this style, so 30A is sort of spice vegetable beer. It's sort of a catch-all style that allows you to sort of take a base style and adulterate it with different types of ingredients to sort of amplify it or change it a little bit. In this case, they decided to take a dark English mild and add all these different ingredients to create sort of a Gruit. It's almost like not a fruit salad, but almost like a vegetable salad with the number of ingredients that are in here. So it's very, very interesting. So right away, when I was looking at...
Let me ask you a quick question. So when you're making a Gruit, it's not exclusive to dark beers, light beers, because this is obviously, a dark English beer. Looks like an English mild a dark English mild in my glass. So it's not, you don't have to be, if you're doing a Gruit, it doesn't have to be light, doesn't have to be dark, doesn't have to be amber. This can be sort of run the gamut.
Correct. And just so everyone knows, technically Gruit isn't in the BJCP guidelines. It's just what we call a beer like this with these types of ingredients. So for those who don't know, Gruits are a very ancient type beverage where beer was made before the properties of hops were known. So instead of bittering the beer or balancing that sweet fermented wort with hops, they were using different ingredients that had bittering or tannic properties like wormwood, sweet gale, juniper tips, rosemary, stuff like that. So it's a very kind of ancient style of beer. It's very interesting. The very few breweries make this beer anymore. Hops are so popular that why would you go back to something like this? But it's pretty interesting. The only brewery I can really think off the top of my head, at least in New England, is Earth Eagle, right? I think they do brew it.
A few of them, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And their stuff's really, really interesting.
Because oddly enough, too, if I'm not mistaken, one of theirs had wormwood in it, too. So they were also experimenting with that as an addition to their, I think it was a Gruit, but for sure they've played with it.
Yeah, and speaking of wormwood, obviously you made the allusion to the Green Fairy, very common ingredient in absinthe. Contrary to popular belief, it does not make you hallucinogenic. I know that's a popular wise tale, but that's not exactly true. I do want to give a quick shout out So a good friend of mine from high school in Spokane, Washington, he opened a brewery there, and he specializes in doing these types of beers. Gruit's foraging different ingredients, putting them in the beers. So shout out to Thomas Croskrey. He's about to open his own brewery in Spokane pretty soon here. But
I mean, can we get some beer mail? Like, can you throw something in a box and shoot it our way? We'll put it on the podcast form.
He's actually brewing stuff currently to kind of prepare for his opening, so I can definitely shoot him a message and see what he thinks. But this is right up his wheelhouse. I think he would have a lot more information on this than I would. To be quite honest, I've judged many competitions. This is the first time I've ever had something like this. That's how rare this type of beer is. So let's dive right into it. As Phil noted, the base style, it's important for this style. As I mentioned, it's sort of a catch-all for these types of beers. It's important to kind of state what the base style is so that the judges have sort of a baseline to judge it on. So the submitter stated it was a dark English mild and then said it was 7%. So right away, a red flag goes up because dark English milds aren't 7%. So there's already an issue here that is a little bit concerning. And I'll get to what I think it should have been submitted as, but just for people that are wondering, that's a little bit high to be a sort of a dark English mild.
Almost double, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So getting to the beer itself, first thing when I pour into it, when I smell it, I get a lot of strong tea notes. It's very herbal. It's very malty. I get a little bit of mint, so maybe some baking spices as it warms. So it's very inviting. It's very interesting smelling. The appearance itself, as Marco noted, it is dark brown. A little bit of light tan head with decent retention. So it's a good looking beer overall. The taste itself, similar to kind of the smell, you get some of those tea and vegetable notes. It's slightly tart malt, a little bit of a caramel sweetness. There is no apparent bitterness. So as I mentioned about Gruits, typically these were before hops were used. So I would suspect there are no hops in here. The submitter didn't indicate, so there's really no way of telling. But I don't really detect any apparent bitterness from hops. But there's enough kind of tannins and slight astringency from the herbs to kind of counter that sweetness.
Yeah, I was going to say, my tasting it right out of the end, and I went into this with a really fresh palate. It perceived to be really bitter the first sip that I took. But as I've taken subsequential sips afterwards, it's not really bitter at all. It was sort of the palate adjusting to it. But as you're saying, it's a bit of that like herbal astringency, but not really bitter. So I was first sip, I was like, oh man, this thing is crazy bitter. But then it just faded away, and then it hasn't come back once I adjusted to it.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think there's a decent balance of the malt and the herbs. I think that's sort of what you want with a Gruit. You want that balance. I think this brewer nailed that. So the mouthfeel itself, like as I mentioned, it's a touch astringent and tannic, which you sort of suspect with these type of ingredients in the base beer. And also, as I mentioned, it's a little boozy for the style for an English mild. So getting back to that, if I was going to submit this as a base style, I probably would have done at 7%. I would have done it as 17A, which is British strong ale. I think that would fit nicely. The color, the maltiness, the ABV, I think that's what you wanted to do as submitting it as your base style. Other than that, it's a pretty solid beer. Judging this category is very difficult. As I mentioned, it's a catch-all. So you have all these different types of beers that some will have cinnamon, some will have rosewater, some will have whatever. And trying to judge all those against each other is very difficult. But if I was going to give this one a score, I'd probably give it a 31, which is pretty good. The biggest knock, of course, is just the base style is inappropriate, and unfortunately, the beer gets docked heavily for that.
Yeah, it makes me kind of curious when somebody's developing a recipe for this. I wish I knew how they landed, and we'll end up asking the person how they landed on dark English mild, because I'm curious. Because in recipe development, if you were targeting a dark English mild, you wouldn't be at 7%. So either something went wrong during the process, or they strictly just try to brew a Gruit and were trying to do category placement after the fact, which was probably more likely what it was.
I agree. It's probably the latter. That would make more sense to me.
Yeah, it's not bad. I was ready to hate this beer when I read it. I'm like, man, there's a ton of stuff in there. I'm not usually a fan of Gruits, but this is actually very reminiscent of a beer, and a beer that I would drink easily. Like it is really warming. I actually think it's quite boozy even for 7%. But the what you talked about earlier with the balance, it's actually really nice, and I think all the flavors and the herbs and because there was anise in here also too, right, Phil?
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, anise and wormwood, which are really. I was expecting it to just be like a punch in your face of that licorice, and it's not. It's actually really nicely balanced with some sweetness. It's pretty nice.
One thing that helps is the fact that other Gruits that I've had, they almost have like a Belgian beer character to it. I don't know if that's due to the yeast they use or the different herbs. This doesn't really have that. I think that really helps a lot too.
Nick, you mentioned you gave it a 31. Was that primarily because the base style was listed as a mild? Would you have given a higher score or different score if it was a British strong ale or a different style?
I might. It's tough because when I think of a Gruit, and maybe this is incorrect, I guess I don't think of a high percentage beer, and maybe that's just my ignorance on that. So I may be docking it a bit there. The other issue too is you have all these different ingredients in here, and I'd have a hard time picking out each one of these, and that's pretty important. When you put an ingredient in this style, you want the judges to be able to pick out those. And so I can't say that I pick out rosemary compared to juniper tips. Even as Marco mentioned, the star anise, I really, maybe if I really look carefully, really kind of taste it carefully, I might be able to pull that out, but it might be kind of difficult. So all these different ingredients that are added, it's hard to tell where one starts and one ends. I think that sort of docks it a bit too. I would probably try and simplify it a little bit. Maybe keep the traditional stuff like the wormwood, the sweet gale, and maybe the juniper tips, and maybe drop the rest. It's just when you add all that stuff, you're gonna have judges looking for it. If they don't get it, then you're gonna get docked for it.
Gotcha.
I also don't think I've ever seen a dark Gruit before. Not that I'm a pro in Gruits by any means, and I certainly haven't had that many. But the ones that I have had have been lighter or paler beers, and I actually like how some of the darker malts work with those herbs, where I haven't necessarily liked how paler malts have worked with it. So again, I would drink this beer. I wouldn't drink a ton of it. It's probably a 12-ounce pour for me, and I'm good. But I would drink it and drink all of it, and I would enjoy the glass for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Well, so that wraps up this session for our judging. Thanks, Nick, for joining us and trying out a Gruit in a style that's pretty ambiguous and an interesting one to be judging today. So appreciate the time, guys, and we'll catch you guys next time.
If you like what you've been hearing on our show, hit that subscribe or follow button on your podcast service. And if you have any ideas or feedback for us, leave us a review or shoot us a DM on Instagram at StrikeMashBoil. Or join the conversation in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/MVHBC. All right, this week we have a special guest joining us, Brett Bauer, who is previously the lead brewer at one of our favorite local breweries in Massachusetts, Idle Hands. Idle Hands is well known for Belgian beers, German lagers, and more these days for New England IPAs. Brett then moved down to Tennessee to Heaven and Ales, but he recently left the professional brewing world to return to the biotech industry. And while he's left professional brewing, he has now joined us as a home brewer. So we're going to dig into Brett's background, learn a little bit about his experiences as a pro brewer, and dig into his plans as he grows into being a home brewer.
Yeah, Brett, thanks for joining us. I have to say you have the distinct honor of being our first pro guest on the show. So we appreciate you taking some time and joining us.
Awesome. I'm very happy to be here and grateful to talk to you guys.
You get to live in infamy. Number one.
Yeah, like, ex-pro right now, expat.
We're still going to call you a pro. You've done... Yeah, true. Yeah, you've come back to the civilian life.
I can go back on Untapped. I can get flights all I want now.
And you can be honest on Untapped now, right? No more no ratings. You can actually rate beers on Untapped.
I can't bring myself to do that.
So we figured we'd kick this off. A bunch of folks are probably familiar with you and familiar with your time at Idle Hands, but we'd love to hear from you a little bit about your background, where you started, how you kind of grew into or got attracted to the beer industry, before you got your first gig. So we'd love to just get a little bit of your background.
Sure. So I got my start. Idle Hands Craft Ales was my first job. It kind of came about after, I was still working in the biotech industry in Cambridge. My background is in chemistry, and started. Once I moved to the Boston area right out of college, I just tried to get involved in the beer industry. So it started with me, volunteering for beer advocates festivals. I was living in Watertown, so I'd stop at Craft Beer Cellar Belmont about every Friday to get like a random mix pack, and that ended up turning into a part-time gig at Craft Beer Cellar Belmont, where I got to meet more people in the industry, and then that's when I got to know Chris, who also happens to be a University of New Hampshire alum, just like me. Weird connection there. And I started volunteering for Idle Hands on the side, so just helping out with bottling sessions, the occasional festival, and then I kind of started getting that itch to do I really want to try and pursue this career in brewing? And I was looking up the American Brewers Guild and the Greg Noonan Scholarship specifically, and it needed a letter of recommendation. So had to get one from a professional brewer and one from someone else in the industry. So I approached Chris, asked him, hey, can you write this letter of recommendation for me? And it just so happened to be at the exact right time where Sean Nolan, who is also Cambridge Brewing Company and is now one of the owners and brewers of Honest Weight Artisan Ales, was just getting ready to leave Idle Hands to start Honest Weight. And they were kind of like low-key looking for someone to join on. So Chris offered me a job on the spot. So I had to choose that night to take a 60% pay cut, lose all my benefits, and go make beer working under Ben Howe and Chris Chikach. So I said yes. There was I knew I would, if I said no, I would go into work the next day, I would sit at my desk, I'd hate myself for the rest of my life if I didn't take this chance. So, and I knew getting to work under Ben Howe was going to be amazing. He was going to teach me everything I needed to know to have a successful career. And sure, he did. I got to work under, I got the, so to circle back again, got the Greg Noonan Scholarship, which Ben Howe was also the recipient. He was the first, I think I was the fifth in 2014. So I got a free ride to the American Brewers Guild, started brewing under Ben. It was just, me and him working all the time. We were the production staff, and that was it. When Idle Hands was a 4-person team back then in that gross Everett warehouse.
I remember it well.
Right? No one forgets those bathrooms. We're always reminded of that. And then, Idle Hands, we were still in that warehouse. And then about a year later, it was when everything kind of felt like it was coming apart. The Everett Casino was happening. Chris was, he got his building basically bought out from under him. Ben got his job in Denmark, so he was leaving. And for some reason, I stuck it out with Chris. Still believed in what he was doing, and sure enough, that was when we got to move a couple tanks to night shift. We were doing the tenant brewing there. I stuck through that, and then sure enough, signed a lease in Malden. Got to help him, build out that place. A lot of pieces that we had to do by hand to save a couple bucks, and set myself up to be lead brewer as soon as that place opened up, and then spent about 3 years there. And it was really rewarding, very challenging. Loved every day of it.
The thing that I find pretty fascinating is, taking a dive into the industry, not being a home brewer first. There's so many examples of folks that want to Be Pro brewers are, making hooch in their bathtub at some point, like we're all doing something crazy. So you did the formal training route. You were really into the industry and you decided to go down the formal training route. What was that like? Was it basically working in a production brewery and just learning on the job? Like what was that all about?
Well, I'll be honest with you guys. I did actually do a little home brewing before that. First time I ever homebrewed was maybe I was a senior in college. And I think it was like Christmas time with my family, and I had just sort of that's when I was kind of exploring the craft beer industry. When I was going to get my beer for the weekend in college, there were two aisles in the grocery store. One was your macros, get your 30 racks and all that kind of thing. And then the one right next to it was the cooler with all the craft beer. And I just saw these 6-packs, and I always wanted to try and find that one go-to, the one I was going to just drink all the time, not have to think about it, and something offered locally and delicious. So that's where kind of the pot started turning of is there a chance I could do this myself? And so happened that my uncle, back when he was in his 20s and 30s, he had done some home brewing as well. So he's like, oh yeah, I'll send you the equipment. So I had no idea what I was getting. Sure enough, a box showed up at my apartment back in Durham, and open it up. I'm like, I have no idea what's going to come. It was a plastic bucket, an airlock, and a capper, and that was it. So from there, I kind of pieced some stuff together. Me and two buddies of mine, we found the biggest pot that we could find, and we did our first partial mash beer. And I think it was some brown ale. Our pot was only half the right size. So we did this weird thing where we poured some wort off into another pot, and as it was boiling off, we'd add it back in. And yeah, I was a terrible home brewer. It was awful.
Well, I think we all have. I can certainly speak for myself, saying that the first homebrew beer I made was pretty awful. The fact that I decided to do it again is miraculous, because my first was pretty horrible. At least you had a bucket and an airlock. I started with the Mr. Beer kit, and the thing was, oh my God, terrible.
Actually, that was the Mr. Beer kind of a little piece of that, because I first got the idea. I was in a speech writing class in college. The professor's name was actually Michael Jackson, and he went by that. It was so strange. We had to do a speech on how to do something, explain to the class how to do something. And one other student in the class basically came in. He's like, I'm going to tell you how to make beer. And it was with a Mr. Beer kit, and that's where I got that first inkling. We're like, hey, I could do this myself.
True story. I was a pretty confident 18-year-old thinking that I could do it, and it just didn't work out so hot. Now, don't get me wrong. We all drank the beer. It was awful, but we certainly drank it. We couldn't buy beer, but we could make it, and that worked out for us. So yeah, all right. So then jumping into the formal training, though. So you sounds like you got a taste of brewing as a home brewer. But what was the formal training like?
So I took part in what's called the Intensive Brewing Sciences and Engineering program at the American Brewers Guild. It's run
Sounds invigorating.
It's yeah. It's intense, that's for sure. It's about a 21-week course. It's all distance learning on DVDs. You have about anywhere between 3 to 7 hours of lectures per week, plus readings, plus weekly quizzes. And then there were 3 exams total. And then at the end of the whole program, you travel to Middlebury, Vermont at Drop-In Brewing Company, where the school is located, and you go through a week residency. And there you have Steve Parks, decades-long educated brewer, brilliant at every aspect of it. Jamie Shear, who I think is the quality control director or manager of Harpoon. Dan Del Grande, who does Bison Brewing, I think it was, this organic contract brewery. Not to mention, these lectures are done by the brightest minds in the industry: Matt Brindleson, Garrett Oliver, at the time, Greg Noonan. Who's the guy from Bell's? John Mallett. And I think is the head brewer of Zero Gravity as well. But all these guys who are just the brightest minds in the industry are here to give you these video lectures. So I get to glean a lot of information. It's very science heavy, very math heavy, which was great. They actually require a lot of prerequisites, and me with my chemistry background worked great. And even working in pharmaceuticals, I did the manufacturing side. So a lot of it's just like cleanliness, organization, aseptic technique, following SOPs, like all those things you need to have a really solid footing in manufacturing, and then just taking that to the brewing industry. And they're so interchangeable. It's why I was so easily able to go back to where I am now.
Well, at what point did they introduce you to being a pro brewer as basically a glorified janitor? Like when do they tell you that?
ABG, they don't quite tell you that because they're too busy like trying to teach you like the raw science and everything. Day one at Idle Hands, it's like, yeah, I think Chris took a picture of me like scrubbing the inside of the kettle, and you just see a big old smile on my face, and yep, I was totally happy to be doing what I was doing.
Yeah, it's one of the things that, us as home brewers often aspire to be pro brewers at some point. We were actually talking about it before you came on for a minute. And, we said, like, then there's the harsh reality of the things that are really required to become a professional. Number one, you mentioned earlier, you're not going to get rich being a brewer, but you'll make some money, but you certainly won't become rich doing it. At least most folks don't get rich doing it. You're doing it for the love of beer, not for the money. But the other part we were joking around about is how labor intensive it is, and that you do a shit ton of cleaning. You probably do more cleaning than you're doing brewing. And I was always curious if that reality is put right out there for you when you're taking the courses.
I mean, they definitely try to hammer that into you as much as possible. It's just like cleanliness is so key. You're going into like the idea of like how yeast management is, and like, yes, like, these things can infect, they can transfer easily, like you're dealing with microbes, like, and also, like I mentioned before, John Mallett, he is from Bell's Brewery, and he goes into a really, really in-depth lecture on equipment management, and he has some horrid pictures of equipment that has just been neglected over time. It's like the dental office when you see like the teeth that are like completely messed up. It's like, this is what happens if you don't take care of your equipment, and it's just like rusted out and broken and terrible looking. And you're like, I never want to have to deal with that in my job ever. Just do what everyone's telling you. Make sure it's clean.
Hey, Brett. So it's Mike Switzer here too. I have a molecular biology background too, so I can
Really?
I can understand the pharmaceutical background and what it takes and the science, and how you were already kind of paired for brewing from that aspect, and probably really for lager brewing, because it's really about controlling things, controlling variables, keeping things tight. But what I'm actually curious about is when you're going through this, brewing degree, there's a lot of art to brewing, and very much like being a great chef, like you have to pull influences from different places and try things that are different. And we have guys in our club that do things that are completely off the wall, and 9 times out of 10, it might be a horrible disaster, and we all mock them for it. But that one time, blows. I'm talking about pizza beer right now.
Yeah,
it blows everybody's mind, and it changes the world. So my question is, when you go through these, and having not done it myself, when you go through these brewing programs, like how much focus is it on like the art and really kind of trying to capture something that nobody else has done? Because, obviously from scientific background, that is easy to teach, but it's really hard to kind of capture that lightning in a bottle. And I always have wondered, when you go through brewing programs, do people talk about that, or are they interested in that? Or is it really just trying to give somebody a foundation and then, you wait for that, Da Vinci to come along?
I mean, I think a lot of this, what the school is trying to teach is just like maintaining consistency, quality control. Just like that was a big forefront. So I think there might have been like, I vaguely remember like one lecture on like recipe development, but it was more so just like really trying to make sure that like you are the best manufacturer you can be, because that's what you're doing in pro brewing. Like this is now a manufacturing job. Like
Yeah.
I know like the industry right now is like really into one-offs, and the same as homebrewing. They're trying to do like these outlandish things that really like grab the attention. But a lot of those places still have to rely on a flagship beer, and it's like if you can't put out that beer like day in day out, same quality over and over again, you're not going to last very long.
Right. No,
Yeah,
Jimi Hendrix, right? He did it a lot, but he made something great.
Yeah, and we definitely want to get your thoughts on the innovation and the current innovation in the beer industry. But we're not going to get to it right now
I think you
because
might have showed your cards.
yeah,
The
I
word
feel like
consistency
I
is
feel like we're
lost.
about to become best friends. I think I get that impression. But so it sounds to me like the courses that you took set you up foundationally, and that art part that Switzer's talking about sounds like that sort of role. The mentorship got fulfilled by Ben Howe, right? I mean, he was the guy that basically started to start showing you the art that came along with the science.
I mean, yeah, like working alongside Ben was a huge influence to me. I think that's even why I would consider myself quite the traditionalist. Like I remember him telling me like times we were brewing Cosmos, and he would hear people say to him like, "Oh, like why aren't you putting coffee and chocolate in this?" Like, well, I can create those wonderful flavors using the 4 ingredients of beer. Like that always really resonated with me. It's like, yes, I can take these 4 ingredients, I can create these wonderful flavors without having to just like dump that flavor, dump that additive in, dump that adjunct in. And I think that's a lot harder to do. I take a lot more pride in that.
Yeah, I actually remember, and I don't know if you ever had the opportunity to see where Ben started, but Ben started in that little garage in Lowell that was about 3/4 of a mile from my mom's house. And the beers he was putting out of that place were pretty impressive. It ended up turning into Navigation Brewing afterwards when he moved down to Idle Hands. The navigation guys moved in there. So, I mean, it must have been pretty wild working with Ben and just seeing what he was able to do with pretty limited resources.
I mean, he's the most imaginative brewer I've known. Like, tell me one other person who's doing method champenois beer in the U.S.
Yeah, but there probably isn't.
Yeah, well,
any.
you could tell by our silence, right?
It's a horribly laborious process. Like, I mean, as soon as Ben left, Chris was like, "We're absolutely never doing that again." And it shows we haven't. I still remember how to do it. I did do it once after Ben left to make a champagne hard cider for a friend's wedding. So I still got it.
Yeah, if you want to kick that over to us, that'd be great.
I have one bottle left, and it's well past its prime.
Yeah, the Beer Brut. I have one bottle left. Maybe I'll break that out and crack it open if you're saying it's maybe past its prime.
I would say any of Ben's beers right now. He would agree. I've definitely seen him chime in a couple times when someone will post that they drank his beer. He's like, I think it's a little past. I drank my last Brut New Year's Eve 2019.
Oh, and I think that I'm thinking about this though. I think technically, didn't Sam Adams do that champagne beer? It's called like Infinium or something. Yeah,
oh,
I think
yes.
it was Infinium. Yeah, they did a champagne beer.
Yeah, Meisterspunner. Yeah, they collabed.
They did. I don't think they did proper method champenois though. I think
it was just like a sparkling beer.
I think they like the Prosecco
now when you
style.
say you did method champenoise, were you putting the necks into cold salt water and then actually purging the yeast and then corking?
Yeah, it wasn't cold salt water. Dry ice and grain alcohol.
Or glycol, or yeah. Wow.
Dry
all right.
You're
a monk.
There was we did riddling, disgorgement. Those things were primed to over 4 volumes of CO2. It was absolutely a real deal. And
yes, but how hazy was your IPA?
Wait, so
that's a real measure of a brewer, right?
Well, so
Ben was doing that too. He was doing that in like 2013.
You were firing off these frozen yeast plugs into like a box somewhere, or were you guys trying to do like distance shots with these things as you're?
No, we had a trash can with a hole cut out that was upside down.
That's awesome.
That sounds like the safe way to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. We all wear safety goggles. Definitely
always wear your safety goggles,
especially when you're firing yeast.
All right, so I mean, you have this time to work with Ben. Kind of, I'm not going to say mentorship. You have a lot of learning experience, but at some point, the reins get handed over to you. What was that like?
It was a slow, gradual process, mostly because Idle Hands was kind of homeless for like a year, where I think we closed up that shop at like 2015, and then reopened, or end of summer 2015, and then beginning of midsummer 2016 is when we reopened in Malden. Which, I'll say kudos to Chris, like to to go from having no location to opening your doors for a brewery in with less than a year is an insane accomplishment for any brewery owner. That he did that really well. He knew what he was going into the second time around, which is great.
But I imagine the pressure that comes with following these guys up is pretty immense, right? I mean, I'm sure you felt confident that them trusting you with, taking on that role spoke volumes to the skill set that you had. But it's got to be nerve wracking. It's got to be pretty tough. Like they're now trusting you with keeping it going.
I never took it for granted. Like that was a fight every day. Just like Idle Hands was something that I had to go in to work every day, and I had to live up to that. For Chris and Grace, for Ben wherever he was, and like for everyone on the staff then, I definitely went in with the mindset of like, I might be steering the ship, but like I'm gonna make it happen. I'm gonna live up to what Idle Hands' reputation has always been, and that's just putting out like accurate, consistent quality beer every time.
Now, when you guys moved to Malden, is that where I don't remember if in Everett you guys were making lagers? Is that when you started the lager program? Was in Malden?
Nope, lagers were started in Everett. If I remember correctly, the German program launched like maybe just before I started, and that was more of a brainchild of Chris and Sean Nolan, who's now at On Its Way. I believe they started with Bier de Das, which was a Dunkelweiss, not a lager yet, but that was their first foray into the German style beers. And then I think the next one was Clara. I think the next was the Dortmund.
I love that beer.
And then followed Adelaide and Brunhilde.
Brunhilde, man.
I love that beer. I'm so jealous that they finally decided to put Brunhilde into cans after I left. I tried to fight that battle. I tried to fight that battle one winter. I was like, hey, I got this tank open. Like, can I do Brunhilde? Can we put it in cans? No.
Belongs
they
in
did
hands.
it right after I left. And then when Ben was there, I think Ben helped bring about Heidi and Brocktoberfest. And then my first entry was Emmeline, of course.
What type of techniques were you using for your lagers? I mean, did you go as traditional as you could? I mean, a lot of us think of Chris Loring and Notch and just the 16-hour brew day that he does to turn out a beer.
We don't have the capability what Chris Loring has.
You do.
He's brilliant. He's got the strongest ethos in the brewing industry, like bar none. He is out to emulate everything that Eastern European beer culture has, and he nails it. We did with, I think the one time we did he invited us to do a tenant brew when Notch first opened. I think he was doing a couple of those with a few people. And man, when he asked me, like, my heart just like grew. I was like, I can't believe you're asking me to like go brew on your brand new system. Holy shit. Sorry, what was the question?
But still, and I would say, he is obviously using every technique and putting tremendous amount of time, effort, and money into making a beer. But all of us, as home brewers, there are people on different levels. There are people that spend a lot of time and use every technique and dedicate themselves to recreating a beer. But there are also people that find a way to make a great beer and not put endless hours and everything into it. And I mean, if you can make a great beer and not do that, that's something too. And you guys were doing lagers in a different way, very successfully. And what do you think contributed to that?
I think that was just our usual ethos, is that attention to detail, that we're trying to put out something that is, as accurately and like as sound as possible to style, like just that traditionalist mentality. But yeah, like, Idle Hands never had horizontal lagering tanks. I think we got spunding valves maybe like a year or two after Malden opened. But for us, it was just that attention to detail. True story. I think it was the 5th batch of beer we brewed at Malden. We did a batch of Adelaide, and this was our 5th beer on a brand new system, like still in tons of debt. And that beer was not up to stuff. Down the drain, the whole thing went.
Wow.
Cheers.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to say
we
kudos
knew,
because
Bros.
we knew that this was going to, like, we're about to, like, reintroduce Adelaide to the world. And, like, this is one that, like, we poured so much into. We hung our hats on when we were in Everett. And, like, if we put out this batch that's, like, just not stuff, doesn't matter. Like, that beer didn't last a week in the tank because as soon as we recognized it a few days in, we're just like, nope, not the stuff. Down it goes.
Yeah, there are a lot of breweries that would just slap a different name on it and try to get it out there and make some money. So kudos to keeping up to the quality that you guys expected yourselves to put out there. We definitely appreciate that. So then you have this, beer style New England IPA that starts to explode across the planet. And so obviously Idle Hands starts putting out their New England IPAs, 4 seam, 2 seams. I mean, I've like all the numbers of seams. So talk about that. You build this, there's this lager program going on, doing it pretty well. Then you have the New England IPA explosion that happens.
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, like it kind of didn't start with the seams, or I think change up, 2 seam was the first, and then like we started doing change up afterwards, which was like the rotating one to kind of like just, explore the style a little bit more. But back when we were in Everett and Enlightenment was still part of it, we were doing Hoffman, his Galaxy Double Pale Ale, and Keezy Citra IPA. And like that definitely gave us a good like footing to start. But yeah, and then 4 seam took over. Man, I think I was following something on Facebook, and like I saw someone had put out like, they were on batch 99, maybe like a couple of months ago, to think about how much that beer has overshadowed what Idle Hands produced. I think when I left, like there was a time when like Triplication was like by far the highest one. Triplication, maybe when Malden opened, was that around like in the batch like 30s range, and then maybe by the time I left Idle Hands, 4 seam, only being produced for like 2 years, had already hit batch 60. So
I think we're going to look back on this era and it'll be like disco, right? We'll be like, wow, there was great music before and then after. And we all love New England IPAs. I'm an admitted, lager head. I love lager and really love everything that goes into it. And you can do great things with New England IPAs too, but it's unbelievable how it's just kind of taken over all the bandwidth of brewing for a while.
Now, Switzer, I also like New England IPAs. What I'm not a huge fan of is where they've been going, right?
Like only IPAs, right? Like I like to listen to a lot of different music. It's just it's everything.
I have 2 questions for you guys. Like, one, I mean, do you think that hazy IPAs don't have maybe the footing, or they have the lasting power of what like American Adjunct Lager has right now? And 2, where are they going? Do tell.
Before Marco goes on a rant answering that question, I think we're going to pause here for this show. We'll continue the conversation with Brett in a couple weeks. Next week, though, we have our first ever beer off. We're going to walk through a specific style of beer and taste some commercial examples and homebrew examples. We'll tell you who's doing that style well and who isn't. It's going to be a lot of fun, so stay tuned for that next week here on Strike, Mash, Boil. The Strike, Mash, Boil podcast is produced by the Merrimack Valley Homebrew Club, an American Homebrewers Association sanctioned club. Follow us on Instagram at MVHBC. Join the conversation in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/MVHBC. And check out our website at mvhbc.com.